right out of the gate, man. As you heard in the intro just a little bit, we have the conservatives fighting in Washington, D.C. It's hard. I get it. It's tough. However, the Conservative Political Action Conference came out, and we talked about this on Friday, wrapping up the program. They came out with their ratings on conservative leaders in D.C., and we have, out of the Republican caucus as a whole, in the Senate and on the House side, about 50% of the caucus in total that's either an 80% or higher, according to the Conservative Political Action Conference ratings on their conservative votes, which is good news. We're at 50%. Obviously can do better in our Republican caucus, but at least that's some good news. One of those guys, however, and we gave him praise on Friday as well, great personal friend, great friend of the show, my representative here in the 4th District of Kansas, as he is right here in studio with us here for the first half hour of the program, Congressman Estes. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Andy?
It is great to see you. First off, congratulations, because not only were you in the top 80%, you were at 97%. So you're up there with like those fringe radicals of like Ted Cruz and those guys.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Well, and I don't think it's fringe radicals. So when you think about what's important for the country, think about what's important for people in Kansas.
Common sense.
Yeah, it's common sense. And the legislation that comes before us and how we should vote, and what we should support, and what we should oppose just makes sense in so many levels.
Well, it does. With the issues, especially that we're seeing today, just a common sense vote is predominantly a conservative vote. I mean, you understand the difference between men and women and boys and girls. And I know that apparently is a radical position to take today.
It really is. And that's sad. You think, in the 1970s, we passed the Title IX Act. I mean, federal government passed that in order to help encourage women and girls to participate in sports. Yeah. And now they're throwing that all out the window by letting boys compete against girls and actually denigrating the accomplishments that they've achieved.
Yeah. Well, and a shout out to our Kansas State legislature and how they were able to override our Democrat governor's veto on that issue. I know Florida's working on the same thing. Not the direction I wanted to go for the program with you, but I had to throw it out that it's a major national issue, and I'm glad we're finally starting to. And it said we have to address it, but at least we are.
It really is, and that, I mean, that's just one of so many issues that don't get enough talk about what's really the common sense around things, and talking about how much federal government's really spending and how much growth of government, and all of these things that kind of get propagandized or swept under the rug or misconstrued and misinformation.
Yeah, amen to that. When you come in, I know we always love to talk about it, and we kind of nerd out on this segment, but the fact that you're kind of at the head of the realm here with both the Ways and Means Committee, the Budget Committee, we like to talk about finances on this program. Last week, you guys presented and passed a bill that would address the debt ceiling issue that's ongoing. Kevin McCarthy trying to talk with the Biden administration. That's not going very far right now, but at least you guys passed something. And I have, it's a decent bill. I don't like the fact that we did raise the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion in this bill, but it shows that you guys are willing to work with Democrats who are not willing to work with Republicans on this issue right now. But how do you feel about it as it kind of came out?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, President Biden and Chuck Schumer have been talking, for months now in terms of saying just raise the debt ceiling, make it a clean debt ceiling increase. Basically, what they want to do is just continue spending money. Yeah. I mean, the problem's not what our debt level is. The problem is that we're spending more money than is coming in. So, President Biden said, he'd had a meeting with Speaker McCarthy and said, let's talk about where we're going forward. That was 89 days ago, and he hasn't done a thing since then to address our debt problem.
Yeah.
When we look at where the federal government spending is this year, we're actually borrowing $1 out of every $5 that's being spent by the federal government. And that's just not sustainable. And so insane. Until we get to the point where we're actually getting our overspending under control, we'll never be able to pay back the debt we have. Right. So that was the piece of, as we were focusing on this bill and passing it forward, was we've dug such a big hole. And I say we, it's Congresses over the years have dug such a big hole that it's going to take longer than 1 year to dig out of it. Yeah. And that was the point that we were looking at is what's a common sense way? I mean, we know it's going to take some time, so let's extend the debt for a little bit longer. Let's start to put in some rational limits on the growth of spending. We're not even doing cuts. What we've included in the bill was spend at the levels for fiscal year 22 for the next year. Now, that's just 18 months ago. So if we're in such bad shape that we can't spend at the same levels we were 18 months ago, that's a pretty bad state for the United States. And then also, COVID's the pandemic level is over with.
Yep.
So there's billions of dollars out there that's not been spent. So let's call that money back. Let's take it off the books in terms of money that's out there to spend, and say, let's focus on what do we need to do going forward, and looking at some regulatory reform, looking at common sense approaches to things like if you're getting benefits, whether it's food stamps or other benefits,
right,
and you're able-bodied and you're childless, you should work. I mean, Americans are generous people. We want to help people, give them a hand up to help them with that process. But Americans do expect that there's some responsibility on the part of the individual to actually work as well.
Again, there's that radical position again there. There's a lot of stuff to break down there. So let's start off with the beginning of this. As like you said, first off, we have a lot of COVID money that was passed that we haven't a lot of, which is weird. They just passed here's a massive amount of money. Now we don't know what to do with it. Why we're not reappropriating that to actually take care of some of the debt and extend out that concern of the government shutting down a debt ceiling, because we're 3.5 months unfunded right now for the federal government until the end of the fiscal year in September. That's common sense. Again, why wouldn't we do something like that? How much money is sitting there right now?
It really is. And there's, by estimates, there's $50 to $60 billion that's not been given out to states, not been given out to businesses, not been given out through Paycheck Protection Program or some of the other good programs that were out there.
Right.
And so how this came about was, once we overcome the initial problem with COVID, and President Trump's Operation Warp Speed developed the vaccine. We had the vaccine rolling out. President Biden came into office. He had to do something to say that, an accomplishment for his first 100 days. So he passed this ARPA bill that was his first 100-day success, and called it a COVID relief bill. And in reality, the COVID dynamic was already in the downward spiral and didn't need to do that. And so money out there that wasn't needed to be spent, and that had the side effect, though, of causing all this inflation that we're suffering through right now. But the money's just lingering out there and not been spent. So, let's pull that back in. If the emergency situation's over, we can always. There's always things that we have to spend money on, but let's not wastefully spend what we have.
Well, let's find the priorities of what we need. That's supposed to be the budgetary process. Again, before we went to the Obama administration, we had the actual 12 appropriation bills. We actually had, it set in stone to decide what we're going to fund, what we're not going to fund. And by the way, at that time, our debt was only 40% of our actual GDP. Now we're at 120% of our GDP, which means if we stole every penny from man, woman, child, and business in the country right now, we would still not have enough money to pay all of our debt. We've never been in a situation like this before. While the Biden administration says, well, you guys have always just willy-nilly just raised the debt ceiling, we've never been at this level before. We got to do something a little bit different.
It really is. I mean, the budget that we're operating under, the appropriations that we're operating under this year, borrows another $1.5 trillion. And President Biden's proposed budget for next year is to borrow another $1.8 trillion with no end in sight, and actually looking at over a 10-year period, increasing our debt by $17 trillion. Now, they tried to mask
on
it.
On top of the 32 that we're on, right?
31 plus that we're at right now. And they tried to mask it by saying, well, we're not borrowing $20 trillion, so therefore we're saving $3 trillion. I mean, that's the kind of games that the counting process that they use shows up in that.
Are they doing the same thing when this budget that you guys have says to increase government only by 1% every year now? As far as I'm aware, a lot of the social programs grow by 4, 5, 6% every year. So according to them, that's a 4% budget cut right there, and everybody's going to die in the streets.
It really is. They make the wailing and gnashing of teeth that, it's a cut, when in reality it's a smaller increase than they wanted. And at the end of the day, if we have an increase in revenue because we have a good economy, we have strong economic growth, we bring in more tax revenue when that happens. But if we spend more than we bring in, then it keeps us underwater. And that's the piece that we've got to rein in and make sure that spending gets knocked down to where ultimately where our growth in revenue comes from.
Yeah, amen to that. We're talking with Congressman Ron Estes, 4th District here in the state of Kansas, my congressman in the Kansas area of South Central Kansas. Let's talk about those social programs for a second. if we get people back onto actually needing to do work requirements, go through training, actually apply like we used to prior to the COVID, back to the old norm, is that going to save us some money on some of the social programs that we've been spending on over the last couple of years? Is that going to help out this process?
It really will. I mean, going back to when President Clinton was in office, he signed the Welfare to Work program, which was the first step at being taken of saying able-bodied American citizens who are receiving hand-ups from their fellow taxpayers ought to go to work. Yeah. And it's a minimum amount. What was in the bill was 20 hours a week. So it's not like it's a burdensome amount of impact on people.
Sure.
Over the years, though, since President Clinton signed that into law, a lot of exceptions have been allowed, and states have been allowed to waive, and COVID made it even worse. Yeah. So a lot of those waivers are in effect, and in multiple states now, you don't have to lift a finger to go to work and get these federal benefits from other taxpayers who are paying the money in.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. We got to take a break here in just a second. It is sad when the Biden administration says that this bill, or Chuck Schumer's the one that said this one, that if this bill passes that you guys proposed, it would cut money from working class and middle class Americans. Although I thought that middle class meant that we wouldn't have to need these certain programs, but yet it's going to cut money away from them, so that way they can't work and get their social programs all at the same time. Kind of a fascinating concept there, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, they'll make up any kind of propaganda spin or misinformation in order to attack some common sense thing.
Yeah, well, and if we need the middle class to be getting social programs as much as they are with working, then we have a deeper issue right now with the fact that they can't even live on a middle class income any longer. Again, goes back to the whole inflation and the spending from the federal government. We'll do some more of that when we come back. You've got to take a break. It's Congressman Ron Estes from the 4th District here in Kansas. We'll talk about this bill. We'll also get into the budgetary process for next fiscal year. Maybe we're a little more confident going into next year. We'll see how that goes right around the corner. What's up? On a Monday. Greatest day of the entire week. Is that right, Congressman? Greatest day?
Every day's a good day, right?
Every day's a good day. Yeah. That's right. That's what it's about. So we've talked about this debt ceiling bill. Let's move forward a little bit to however this ends up, which will be interesting to see by the end of this year. Again, we're unfunded by, they say we could potentially shut down early to mid-June. So we're about 3.5 months out that we have to figure out funding for. But let's go to the next fiscal year. Obviously, you're a big part of that as well, writing, working on the appropriations. Again, we haven't had 12 appropriations bills since before Obama. Can we get it this year? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it's a possibility. It can happen. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of distraction with the debt limit discussion that's going to happen. Some of this stuff's going to be done in parallel. Yeah. We now that the House has voted on the debt ceiling, and as part of that bill, we said let's make the fiscal 2022 levels our baseline for 2024. So the federal budget that starts October 1.
Sure.
So now the Appropriations Committee is starting their work. So they're out looking at the details to fit under those parameters, those dollar spending levels.
Sure.
And so I think we'll probably be voting, if not late June and early July in the House on the appropriations for fiscal 2024. And then it goes over to the Senate for them to vote on. That'll be about the time frame that we finish up with the debt ceiling discussions, based on what Secretary Yellen and some of the big banks are estimating when the extraordinary measures will run out. So
I was going to ask you, she keeps saying they're using extraordinary measures to keep paying. What are those extraordinary measures? Do we know?
So it's all at the Secretary's discretion of what happens. So basically, instead of issuing new debt to pay our bills, what she's doing is taking the cash that comes in, paying the outgoing obligations, whether it's paying interest on a note or whether it's paying off Social Security or other things.
Sure.
But she's not doing things like depositing money into the federal retirement system or not issuing on behalf of states new debt that the states could then utilize for some of their programs. So it is, they call it extraordinary measures, but basically it means just juggling around without creating real new debt.
Almost like a family budget. You actually have to just move money around a little bit to make sure to pay the debts here, which is not a bad thing. Is it true that even if we don't end up passing a bill, is it true even if we shut down the government or whatever, that we would not default on debts because that would be the number one priority with whatever tax revenue comes in?
So the issue is right now is we we have enough revenue coming in to pay 80% of our current spending. So we could continue to pay that 80% of it. Problem is, we're borrowing that other percent. That goes back to $1 out of $5 that are being spent is borrowed. So you could easily prioritize. In fact, that's exactly what the Secretary's doing right now. Is she is prioritizing the bills she is paying and not making some payments or deposits into the retirement account or other things that she could do because of that extra $1 out of $5 that there's not issuing new debt for.
That almost seems like, and we're almost out of it. We got like 30 seconds here. That almost seems like that's where the politics comes into play, because if we're only needing to borrow 20% to cover bills that go out on a monthly basis, and if something like this happens, it's at the discretion of the Treasury Department to decide what's not getting paid out, which falls into the politics of how bad do we want the consumer to get hit for them to see the impact of what you guys are not doing.
And that really does get into the propaganda or misinformation standpoint, and whether it's Schumer or Biden or the Secretary. In any case, they talk about how bad it would be. And the Republicans don't want to default on our debt. I mean, we want to pay our obligations, but we need to have the revenue to pay off our spending.
And almost like the government shutdowns when Obama's like, we're going to shut down the tourism in D.C. because of the government. Come on, man. Yeah, that's what it is. Congressman, we're out of time, my friend. Keep up the fight. Your 97% CPAC rating is amazing. Thank you for what you do. We'll get you back on here again soon.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.